Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu has now tabled much anticipated legislation to improve water quality in First Nation communities. Now, this has been a government promise for a long time. In fact, in 1991, Prime Minister Brian Mulroney committed to equality and access to safe drinking water for everyone by the year 2001. Think about that, 2001. Then in 2015, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau committed to ending all long-term drinking water advisories by March of 2021. Today, there are still 28 long-term drinking water advisories still in effect across Canada. Negon Sinclair is a professor of Native Studies at the University of Manitoba, and he joins us from there this morning. Good morning to you.
Morning, Lindsey.
Why is this taking so long?
The issue of water is a complicated one on the side of Canada, not for First Nations, because it inevitably involves the issue of rights and who makes the determination of whether First Nations will get access to water is a complicated issue for Canada because it's quite expensive, but it's also something in which Canada has been very resistant to give up control of because it lends into a litany of other issues involving jurisdiction. First Nations, of course, for a long time have asserted that water is a part of land claims and that water is something in which First Nations have a very unique relationship with, an illegal relationship, but Canada is not really privy to wanting to get into that side of things.
I talked about the fact that there has been legislation before. So, Professor, what makes this piece of legislation different?
The thing that's very specific and interesting about this legislation is it sets up a First Nations-led water commission, which then does two things. One is it gives First Nations measures of control of the waterways that do impact them. And so situations like, for instance, in Grassy Narrows, where you have a long-standing issue involving pollution in the water, makes it undrinkable. You can't eat the fish from that area. That means that First Nations would get a say over what happens and what impacts that waterway. That means industries involved. That means First Nations have a role in governance. And that's been something that often provinces have been very resistant on. They're the ones who control the natural resources often of water. And so that gives First Nations almost an on-par relationship with provinces. And you can imagine how provinces would want to be able to control their jurisdiction over all things, and they don't want to share that power.
Will it go far enough?
Well, certain First Nations say they haven't been consulted on this law. The Minister Hajdu has said that everyone got a copy of this and everyone had an opportunity to have a say. I mean, particularly those First Nations in Alberta yesterday were very resistant to having this imposed upon them. But I mean, certainly it does lend a number of issues. Assembly of First Nations Regional Representative Glenn Hare yesterday was saying that this would go a long way to be able to control some of the issues in Northwestern Ontario, particularly with the negotiations of the Ring of Fire happening. So I think it does give First Nations some measure of control, but it's not in any way about sovereignty. It's about giving First Nations a seat at the table, perhaps with provinces.
What do you think we need to do to make sure that everybody in this country has long-term, sustainable access to clean drinking tap water?
Well, the fact is that First Nations peoples have never really been treated as human beings. And that's a real concerning thing, I think, for all Canadians. And if we treated First Nations like human beings, we would, A, say that it matters that they get clean drinking water, and we would see the issues of, for instance, child welfare or poverty or diabetes or sickness or cancer, that these are all related to issues of things like water. So we would see that First Nations have been impacted for a long time. If we took action, then we would let First Nations make determinations for themselves, and then we would start to see First Nations as actual nations, partners within Confederation, not just simply a bunch of municipalities that Canada makes decisions for and, frankly, treats with utter neglect.
Well, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Professor Negon Sinclair.
Miigwech, thanks so much, Lindsey.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.